What if Coruscant became a neutral planet? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The vote passes. Palpatine's face goes white. 20,000 years of history, gone in a single afternoon. Coruscant is no longer the capital of the Republic. The Jedi are being asked to leave their temple. The Senate must relocate. And the most powerful man in the galaxy just watched his empire crumble before his eyes. He grips his console so hard his knuckles crack. This was not supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. He had planned for everything, every contingency, every possibility. But not this. Never this. The chamber erupts around him. Senators screaming, some in joy, some in fury. The sound is deafening, but Palpatine hears none of it. His mind races through decades of careful manipulation, all of it suddenly worthless. The war he orchestrated, the chaos he cultivated, the fear he weaponized, all of it designed to bring the galaxy under his control. And now the galaxy has chosen a different path. But how did this happen? How did the heart of civilization decide to tear itself free from a war that was supposed to ensure Palpatine's ultimate victory? The answer lies in a single devastating attack, and the fury it unleashed in the people who survived it. 3 weeks earlier, the skies of Coruscant burned. The motion is simple in its wording, but catastrophic in its implications. Coruscant, the capital of the Galactic Republic, the seat of the Senate, the home of the Jedi Order, will declare itself neutral in the Clone Wars. It will withdraw from the conflict entirely. It will ask both the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems to recognize its neutrality and remove all military assets from its surface and surrounding space. The Chancellor will be asked to relocate. The Jedi will be asked to leave their temple. Everything Palpatine has spent decades building will crumble in a single afternoon. The voting begins, and Palpatine watches the tallies climb with growing horror that he keeps hidden behind that mask of statesmanship. Alderaan votes yes. Chandrila votes yes. Corellia votes yes. World after world, system after system, the representatives of Coruscant's own population vote yes. The people have spoken through their elected officials, and their message is clear. They are tired of war. They are tired of being a target. They are tired of watching their children die in a conflict that seems to have no end. When the final tally is announced, the chamber erupts. Some senators cheer, tears streaming down their faces. Others sit in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend what has just happened. A handful storm out in fury, their protests drowned by the cacophony. Palpatine calls for order, but his voice sounds hollow, and for the first time in his long political career, no one seems to be listening to him. The motion has passed. Coruscant is now neutral, and everything changes. To understand how this moment came to be, we must look back to the events that shattered the people's faith in the Republic and its war. The Battle of Coruscant was supposed to be impossible. For centuries, the capital world had been considered untouchable, protected by its position at the heart of civilized space, defended by the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever known, watched over by the legendary Jedi Order. No enemy would dare strike at Coruscant itself. That was what everyone believed, until General Grievous proved them wrong. The Separatist attack came without warning. Thousands of ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the planet, their weapons already firing. The defensive fleet scrambled to respond, but the assault was overwhelming in its ferocity. While the battle raged in space, Grievous himself led a strike team to the surface. His objective was audacious beyond measure. He intended to kidnap the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic from the heart of its power. And he succeeded. The people of Coruscant watched in horror as their sky burned. They fled through streets choked with debris and smoke. They huddled in shelters as the sounds of battle echoed through the artificial canyons of their world. Children screamed for parents they would never see again. Families were torn apart. Entire districts were devastated by falling wreckage from the space battle above. The official casualty reports would later be classified, but whispers spread of tens of thousands dead, perhaps hundreds of thousands. The true number was something the government preferred not to discuss. When the battle finally ended, when Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi rescued the Chancellor and killed Count Dooku, the people were told to celebrate. They were told this was a great victory. But the people of Coruscant did not feel victorious. They felt violated. They felt betrayed. They looked at the scarred face of their world and asked a simple question that no one in power seemed willing to answer. How did this happen? The anger built slowly at first, a simmering resentment that expressed itself in whispered conversations and late-night discussions. But as the weeks passed and the war continued with no end in sight, that anger began to boil over. Protest movements sprang up across the planet. Citizens demanded answers. They demanded accountability. And most of all, they demanded safety. The Republic had promised to protect them, and the Republic had failed. If the government could not keep them safe, then perhaps it was time for the people to take matters into their own hands. A figure emerged from this chaos, a woman named Vara Solen. She was not a senator or a politician in the traditional sense. She was a community organizer from the lower levels, someone who had spent her life fighting for the forgotten people who lived in the shadows of Coruscant's gleaming towers. When the battle came, her district was hit hard. She lost friends, she lost family, and she channeled that grief into something powerful. Vara began speaking at rallies, her voice carrying across crowds that grew larger with each passing day. She spoke of neutrality, of Coruscant withdrawing from a war that brought only death and destruction to its people. At first, the establishment dismissed her as a fringe figure, a grieving woman lashing out at forces beyond her understanding. But her message resonated in ways they never anticipated. People were tired, people were scared, and people were ready to listen to anyone who offered them a path to peace. Senator Bail Organa watched this movement with complicated feelings. As a man who had dedicated his life to the Republic, the thought of its capital abandoning the cause filled him with unease. And yet, he could not deny the legitimacy of the people's anger. He had seen the corruption that festered in the Senate. He had watched as Palpatine accumulated more and more emergency powers. He had begun to wonder if the Republic he served still existed in any meaningful sense, or if it had already transformed into something darker. When Vara Solen requested a meeting with him, Bail agreed. They talked for hours in his private office, and by the end of that conversation, something had shifted in the senator from Alderaan. He did not fully embrace her cause, but he understood it. And when the time came, he would not stand in its way. Padme Amidala found herself in an even more difficult position. She had been one of the most vocal advocates for peace throughout the war, pushing for diplomatic solutions even as others called for total victory. The neutrality movement aligned with many of her beliefs, and she could see the merit in its arguments. But she also knew what neutrality would mean for the Jedi, for Anakin, for everything she cared about. The thought of the Order being forced from its ancient home troubled her deeply. She visited the temple in the days before the vote, walking through its halls with a heavy heart. Anakin found her there, sensing her distress through their bond. They spoke in hushed tones, away from prying eyes, discussing what the future might hold. Anakin's feelings were characteristically intense. He hated the idea of the Jedi being displaced, of being forced to abandon the only home the Order had ever known. But when Padme asked him what he truly wanted, his answer surprised them both. "I want this war to end," he said. "I want to stop watching my friends die. I want to be with you without having to hide. If neutrality can give us that, then maybe it's not such a terrible thing." Padme held him then, and for a moment, the galaxy's problems seemed very far away. But they both knew that moment could not last. The vote was coming, and no matter which way it went, their lives would never be the same. Chancellor Palpatine worked frantically behind the scenes to prevent the unthinkable. He called in favors, he made promises, he issued subtle threats. His network of influence, so carefully cultivated over decades, was mobilized in its entirety. But for the first time, he found that his power had limits. The people's anger was too deep, too raw, too genuine to be easily manipulated. Every time he tried to redirect their fury toward the Separatists, they came back with the same question. Why were we not protected? He considered more drastic measures. A single well-placed tragedy could shift public opinion overnight. A separatist attack on a refugee center, perhaps, or an assassination attempt that he barely survived. But the timing was too delicate, the scrutiny too intense. Any false move now could expose him. He needed to be patient. He needed to let this play out and find a way to turn it to his advantage later. But as the vote approached and his counts showed the neutrality motion gaining support, Palpatine felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. Uncertainty. His great plan, the culmination of the Sith's 1,000-year revenge, was being threatened not by the Jedi or by any enemy he had anticipated, but by ordinary people who simply wanted to stop being afraid. The day of the vote arrived, and the Senate convened in an atmosphere of unprecedented tension. Security was heightened throughout the district, with clone troopers patrolling every corridor. Protesters gathered outside by the millions, their chants echoing through the artificial canyons. Inside the chamber, senators took their positions with the weight of history pressing down upon them. Palpatine made one final appeal before the voting began. He spoke of duty and sacrifice. He spoke of the Republic's noble traditions and the importance of standing together against tyranny. He reminded them that surrendering to fear was exactly what the Separatists wanted. His words were eloquent and carefully crafted, hitting every emotional note he had practiced. And when he finished, the applause was thunderous. But then Vara Solene rose to speak. She had been granted the floor as a representative of the people's movement, a rare honor for someone who held no official position. She walked to the center of the chamber with quiet dignity, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Chancellor Palpatine speaks of duty," she said. "He speaks of sacrifice. But I wonder, has he ever held a dying child in his arms? Has he ever searched through rubble for the bodies of his loved ones? Has he ever breathed the smoke of his burning home? The people of Coruscant have done these things. We have sacrificed more than any senator in this chamber can imagine, and we are done." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "We are told that neutrality is cowardice. We are told that we must fight to the last breath for the Republic. But I ask you, what is the Republic? Is it these towers of glass and steel? Is it the politicians who send our children to die in their name? Or is it us, the people who live and work and love on this world? If the Republic cannot protect us, then perhaps it is time for us to protect ourselves. Not through war, but through peace. Not through fighting, but through refusing to fight. Let Coruscant be a beacon of hope in this dark time. Let us show the galaxy that there is another way. When she finished, the silence stretched for a long moment. And then the voting began. The results, when they were announced, sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The motion for neutrality passed by a margin that surprised even its supporters. Coruscant would withdraw from the Clone Wars. The Chancellor would be given 30 standard days to relocate the government. The Jedi Order would be asked to remove its presence from the planet. All military assets would be withdrawn. Coruscant would stand alone, neutral, seeking peace. In his private chambers that night, Palpatine stood before the window and looked out at the city that had been his seat of power for so long. His reflection stared back at him, and for just a moment, he let the mask slip. His eyes burned with the yellow fire of the dark side, and his face twisted into an expression of pure hatred. They had taken his capital. They had disrupted his plans. They had dared to defy him. But Darth Sidious had not survived for this long by giving in to momentary setbacks. He would adapt. He would find a way to turn this to his advantage. And when the time was right, he would make them all pay. The news of Coruscant's neutrality spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, every major news network was covering the story. Commentators debated the implications. Military analysts speculated about what this meant for the war effort. Politicians from both sides scrambled to respond to a development that no one had anticipated. On the streets of Coruscant itself, the reaction was one of cautious celebration. Crowds gathered in the public squares, waving banners and chanting slogans of peace. There were tears of relief and shouts of joy. For so long, the people had lived in fear, watching the sky for signs of another attack, wondering if their world would be the next battlefield. Now, finally, they had taken their fate into their own hands. But there were also voices of dissent. Veterans of the war who had fought and bled for the Republic felt betrayed. Families who had lost loved ones in the conflict wondered if their sacrifices had been in vain. Business owners who relied on military contracts worried about their futures. The neutrality vote had not been unanimous, and the divisions it created would take years to heal. Vara Solene addressed the people that night, standing on a makeshift stage in the heart of the city. Her voice carried across the crowd, amplified by speakers that had been hastily set up. "This is not the end of our struggle," she said. "It is only the beginning. We have chosen a different path, but that path will not be easy. There will be those who try to pull us back into the conflict. There will be those who see our neutrality as weakness. We must prove them wrong. We must show the galaxy that peace is not surrender. Peace is strength." The crowd roared its approval, and for a moment, it seemed like anything was possible. On Republic worlds, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a betrayal, an abandonment of the cause at its most critical hour. Others viewed it with envy, wishing their own worlds could escape the endless cycle of violence. Military commanders worried about the strategic implications. Politicians scrambled to understand what this meant for the balance of power. On separatist worlds, the reaction was equally complex. Count Dooku was dead, killed during the Battle of Coruscant, and General Grievous had assumed a more prominent leadership role. The cyborg general saw the neutrality declaration as a sign of weakness, proof that the Republic was crumbling from within. He advocated for pressing the advantage, for launching new offensives while the enemy was in disarray. But cooler heads in the separatist parliament urged caution. A neutral Coruscant could be useful. It could provide a venue for negotiations, a way to end the war without total surrender. The Jedi Council met in emergency session to discuss their options. The temple on Coruscant had been the heart of the Order for millennia. Its archives contained irreplaceable knowledge. Its walls had witnessed the training of countless generations of Jedi. The thought of abandoning it was almost unbearable. Master Yoda sat at the head of the council, his ancient eyes heavy with sorrow. "Difficult times these are," he said. "But the will of the people, respect we must." Master Windu's expression was stern. "The people do not understand what they are asking. If we leave, who will protect them from the Sith? We know there is a Sith Lord operating in the shadows. Abandoning Coruscant could leave the entire planet vulnerable." Obi-Wan spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps this is an opportunity rather than a setback. The Jedi have become too entangled with the Republic's politics. We have become generals in a war that has no end. Maybe stepping back, even temporarily, could help us rediscover what we truly are." Ki-Adi-Mundi shook his head. "The archives cannot be moved. Our history, our knowledge, everything that makes us who we are is in that temple. If we leave, we lose more than a building. We lose ourselves." The debate continued for hours, with no clear resolution emerging. In the end, the council reached a compromise that satisfied no one. The majority of the Order would relocate with the Republic to the new capital on Chandrila. But a small contingent would remain on Coruscant, ostensibly as neutral peacekeepers who would help maintain order during the transition. In reality, they would guard the temple and ensure that its contents remained protected. Anakin was among those chosen to stay. The Council's reasoning was pragmatic. He was one of the strongest Jedi alive, and his presence would serve as a deterrent against any who might seek to exploit the chaos. But Anakin suspected there was another reason. The Council still did not fully trust him. They wanted him away from the front lines, where his aggressive tendencies and emotional nature had caused problems. Coruscant, they reasoned, would be a quiet posting where he could do little harm. For Anakin, the assignment was a gift he had never expected. He would be separated from the war. He would be on the same planet as Padme. For the first time since their secret marriage, they might be able to spend real time together without the constant fear of discovery. The thought filled him with a hope he had almost forgotten how to feel. But the transition was not smooth. As news of the Neutrality Declaration spread, divisions began to appear within the Jedi Order itself. Some masters believed strongly that the Order's duty was to the Republic, that they could not abandon the cause they had served for so long. Others felt that the war had corrupted the Jedi's purpose, that this was a chance to return to their true calling as peacekeepers and guardians. Younger Jedi, particularly those who had spent years fighting on the front lines, had their own opinions. Many were simply exhausted, drained by the endless battles and the constant death. The idea of peace, of stepping back from the conflict, appealed to them in ways they were almost ashamed to admit. They had been trained to be selfless, to sacrifice everything for the greater good. But the greater good had started to feel like a hollow concept when they watched their friends die day after day. Master Plo Koon surprised many when he announced his intention to remain on Coruscant. He had been one of the Order's most respected generals, leading his forces with wisdom and compassion. But he had grown weary of war. He had seen too many of his men fall, too many lives cut short by a conflict that seemed to serve no purpose. "If neutrality could bring peace," he said, "then I will stand with it." His decision influenced others. Kit Fisto chose to stay as well, along with Aayla Secura and several other notable Jedi. The temple contingent grew larger than the council had originally intended, and some began to whisper that a schism was forming within the Order itself. The Republic government's relocation to Chandrila was a logistical nightmare. Thousands of officials, support staff, and military personnel had to be moved. Archives had to be transferred. Communication networks had to be redirected. The process took weeks longer than planned, and during that time, a power vacuum formed on Coruscant that various factions sought to exploit. The criminal underworld saw an opportunity. For years, the presence of the Jedi and the Republic's security forces had kept them in check. Now, with the government leaving and the Jedi presence reduced, ambitious crime lords began to make moves. The Hutt cartels sent representatives to establish new operations. The Black Sun Syndicate expanded its influence in the lower levels. Smuggling networks that had been dormant for years suddenly came back to life. Anakin found himself dealing with threats he had never anticipated. Instead of leading clone troopers into battle against separatist forces, he was now mediating disputes between rival gangs and investigating corruption among the local security forces. It was frustrating work beneath the dignity of a Jedi Knight. But it also gave him time, and that time he spent with Padme. Their meetings were still secret, but the secrecy felt different now. Without the war constantly pulling them apart, they could actually talk about the future. They could discuss what their lives might look like when the conflict finally ended. And as the weeks passed, Padme shared news that changed everything. She was pregnant. Anakin received the information with a mixture of joy and terror. A child. Their child. The thought was overwhelming. He held Padme in his arms and promised her that everything would be all right, that he would protect them both no matter what happened. But in the quiet moments when he was alone, fear crept in. The Jedi forbade attachment. If anyone discovered the truth, he would be expelled from the Order. And more than that, he had begun to have dreams. Dark dreams. Dreams of Padme in pain, crying out for him, dying. He tried to push these visions aside, to focus on the present rather than a future that might never come. But the dreams persisted, growing more vivid and more disturbing with each passing night. He began to sleep less, to meditate more, trying desperately to understand what the Force was trying to tell him. And through it all, he told no one. Not Padme, not Obi-Wan, not any of the Jedi who might have helped him interpret what he was experiencing. He kept his fear locked away, and it festered in the darkness. The establishment of Coruscant's neutral government was a complex process. The planet had never truly governed itself, always deferring to the Republic's authority on matters of policy and law. Now, a new system had to be created from scratch. Vara Salen emerged as a key figure in this process, her popularity with the people translating into real political power. She was elected to lead the Transitional Council, a body tasked with creating a permanent government structure. Her first priority was establishing diplomatic relations with both sides of the conflict. Coruscant needed guarantees from the Republic and the Separatists that its neutrality would be respected. This required delicate negotiations, and Padme found herself playing an unexpected role. Despite her long association with the Republic, her reputation as a peacemaker made her a trusted intermediary. She traveled between Chandrila and Raxus, carrying messages and helping to build the framework for a permanent ceasefire. General Grievous initially refused to participate in any talks. The cyborg general had no interest in peace. He lived for war, for the thrill of combat, for the satisfaction of adding lightsabers to his collection. But the Separatist Parliament, weary of a conflict that was draining their resources, overruled him. Representatives were sent to Coruscant, where they sat across the table from Republic officials for the first time since the war began. The talks were contentious from the start. Both sides had grievances that ran deep. The Republic accused the Separatists of atrocities against civilian populations. The Separatists countered with evidence of corruption and exploitation by Republic-aligned corporations. Old wounds were reopened. Voices were raised. On several occasions, the negotiations seemed on the verge of collapse. But Padme persisted. She reminded both sides of what was at stake. She spoke of the children growing up knowing nothing but war, of the economies being destroyed, of the cultures being lost. She painted a picture of a galaxy at peace, where differences could be resolved through dialogue rather than violence. And slowly, painfully, progress was made. Chancellor Palpatine watched these developments from his new office on Chandrila with barely concealed fury. Every step toward peace was a step away from his grand design. He needed the war. He needed the chaos. He needed the fear that allowed him to accumulate power. If the conflict ended through negotiation, if the Republic and the Separatists found common ground, everything he had worked for would be lost. He began to formulate a plan. If he could not stop the peace talks through political means, he would have to take more direct action. A crisis was needed, something dramatic enough to reignite the flames of war. Something that would turn the people of Coruscant against neutrality and bring them back into the fold. His eyes turned to the Separatists, specifically to General Grievous. The cyborg's hatred of the Jedi was legendary, as was his impulsiveness. If Grievous could be manipulated into attacking Coruscant again, the resulting outrage would destroy the peace movement overnight. But the timing had to be perfect, and the manipulation had to be subtle. Grievous was a tool, but a dangerous one. He would need to be pointed in the right direction without realizing he was being used. Palpatine reached out through his network of spies and agents. He planted information suggesting that the Jedi remaining on Coruscant were planning an offensive operation, that they were using the cover of neutrality to prepare a strike that would end the war in the Republic's favor. The information was fabricated, of course, but it was designed to appeal to Grievous's paranoia and his hatred. The cyborg took the bait. He began planning what he called a preemptive strike, a surgical operation to eliminate the Jedi presence on Coruscant before they could carry out their supposed attack. His staff tried to dissuade him, pointing out that such an action would violate the neutrality agreement and turn galactic opinion against the Separatists. But Grievous was beyond reason. His hatred of the Jedi consumed him, and he would not rest until they were destroyed. On Coruscant, Anakin sensed that something was wrong. He could feel a disturbance in the Force, a gathering darkness that put him on edge. He tried to meditate, to gain clarity, but the visions that came to him were fragmented and confusing. He saw fire and destruction. He saw Padme reaching out to him. He saw a face twisted with malevolence, but he could not make out its features. Something terrible was coming, and he did not know how to stop it. He sought out Master Plo Koon, hoping the Elder Jedi's wisdom might help him interpret what he was experiencing. Plo listened carefully as Anakin described his visions, his weathered face growing more concerned with each detail. "The dark side clouds everything," Plo said. "But your instincts have served you well in the past, Anakin. If you feel danger approaching, we must take precautions. I will speak with the others. We will increase our vigilance." Anakin wanted to say more, wanted to share the full extent of his fears, but something held him back. The part about Padme, about the pregnancy, about his dreams of her death, those he kept to himself. They were too personal, too dangerous to reveal. Even now, even in this moment of crisis, He could not bring himself to trust anyone completely. The attack came 3 weeks later. Grievous's fleet dropped out of hyperspace in the early morning hours, catching Coruscant's minimal defense forces completely off guard. His target was specific: the Jedi Temple. He did not care about conquering the planet or capturing its leaders. He wanted only to destroy the Jedi, to complete the mission he had failed during his previous assault. The first wave of fighters screamed down through the atmosphere, their weapons blazing. Anti-aircraft batteries that had been maintained by the neutral government returned fire. But they were hopelessly outgunned. Civilians fled through the streets, their screams mixing with the roar of explosions. It was the nightmare of the Battle of Coruscant all over again. But this time, there was no Republic fleet to come to the rescue. Anakin was in the temple when the attack began. He felt the explosions through the Force before he heard them. The sudden surge of fear and pain from thousands of people hitting him like a physical blow. He grabbed his lightsaber and ran toward the entrance, where other Jedi were already gathering. Kit Fisto's face was grim. "They're targeting us specifically. This isn't a planetary invasion." "Grievous?" Plo Koon said. "It has to be. Only he would be foolish enough to violate the neutrality agreement so blatantly." Anakin's mind raced. Padme was in her apartment across the city. She was pregnant, vulnerable, unable to defend herself. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, to protect her. But the temple was under attack, and his fellow Jedi needed him. He was being torn apart by conflicting loyalties, and there was no time to think. "I'm going after Grievous," he said. "If we take him down, his forces will fall apart." Ayla Secura shook her head. "We should stay together. The temple can be defended if we work as one." But Anakin was already moving. He raced through the corridors, his lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss. The temple's defenses were activating, automated systems coming online to repel the invaders. But they would not hold for long against a concentrated assault. He needed to end this quickly. He burst onto one of the temple's landing platforms just as a separatist shuttle touched down. Battle droids poured out, their weapons firing. Anakin threw himself into the fight, his blade a blur of blue light. He cut through droid after droid, the Force guiding his movements, making him faster and stronger than any normal being could be. But for every enemy he destroyed, 2 more took its place. Grievous had come in force. And then the general himself appeared. Grievous descended from his personal shuttle, his cape billowing in the wind generated by the battle. 4 lightsabers hung from his belt, trophies taken from Jedi he had killed. His yellow eyes locked onto Anakin, and a sound emerged from his vocabulary that might have been a laugh. "Skywalker," he rasped. "At last, I have been looking forward to this." "You've made a mistake coming here, Grievous. This time, you won't escape." The cyborg's arms split, and suddenly 4 lightsabers ignited, spinning in complex patterns. He advanced on Anakin, his mechanical body whirring and clicking. The attack was overwhelming in its ferocity, blades coming from every direction. Anakin was forced back, his single weapon struggling to defend against the onslaught. But Anakin was not the frightened young Padawan who had faced Dooku all those years ago. He had grown, he had learned. And more than that, he had something to fight for beyond his own survival. Padme's face flashed in his mind, and with it came a surge of determination. He ducked under a sweeping blow, rolled to the side, and came up with his lightsaber driving toward Grievous's torso. The cyborg twisted away, but the tip of Anakin's blade scored a line across his chest plate. Sparks flew, and Grievous snarled in fury. They fought across the landing platform, their duel illuminated by the fires burning throughout the temple district. Anakin drew on all his training, all his experience, and yes, all his anger. He knew the Jedi teachings warned against such emotions, but in this moment, he did not care. Grievous had attacked his home. Grievous had put Padme in danger. Grievous would pay. He caught one of the cyborg's lightsabers on his own blade and twisted, wrenching it from Grievous's grip. The weapon clattered to the ground, and Anakin kicked it over the edge of the platform. 3 lightsabers now. Then 2, as Anakin sliced through one of Grievous's mechanical wrists. Then 1, as a force-enhanced kick sent another weapon spinning into the darkness. Grievous backed away, his remaining lightsaber held defensively. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in those yellow eyes. "This is not possible," he hissed. "You are just a Jedi." Anakin advanced, his blade steady. "I'm more than that." The final exchange was brief. Grievous lunged, and Anakin sidestepped. His lightsaber swept in a precise arc, cutting through the cyborg's chest plate and into the organic components beneath. Grievous's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle emerged. Then he collapsed, his metal body clanging against the platform, and moved no more. Anakin stood over the body, breathing hard. The sounds of battle still echoed around him, but they were growing fainter. With Grievous dead, the Separatist forces were losing coordination. The Jedi and what remained of Coruscant's security forces were pushing them back. But even in victory, Anakin felt no relief. Something was still wrong. The darkness he had sensed had not dissipated with Grievous's death. If anything, it seemed stronger now, more focused. And then he understood. Grievous was not the source. He was a tool, a weapon wielded by someone else. Someone who had wanted this attack to happen. Someone who stood to benefit from the chaos and destruction. Palpatine. The realization hit Anakin like a thunderbolt. Every piece suddenly fit together. The false information that had provoked Grievous. The timing of the attack, just as peace talks were making progress. The way the Republic had failed to send any assistance despite being notified of the assault. It all pointed to one conclusion. The Chancellor, the man Anakin had trusted and admired for years, was behind this. He needed proof. He needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. But first, he needed to make sure Padme was safe. He raced across the city, using the Force to enhance his speed. The streets were filled with smoke and debris, the aftermath of the battle that had raged through the district. Emergency services were already responding, their vehicles weaving through the destruction. Anakin ignored them all, his focus entirely on reaching Padme's apartment. When he arrived, he found her waiting for him. She ran into his arms, and for a moment, he just held her, feeling her heartbeat, confirming that she was alive and unharmed. "Anakin, what's happening? Who attacked us?" "Grievous," he said. But he wasn't acting alone. Someone orchestrated this. Someone wanted to destroy the peace talks. Padme pulled back, her eyes searching his face. "Who?" Anakin hesitated. The accusation was enormous. If he was wrong, the consequences would be devastating. But if he was right, the consequences of doing nothing would be even worse. "The Chancellor." Padme's face went pale. "Are you certain?" "No. But I intend to find out." Over the following days, Anakin conducted his investigation. He reached out to contacts he had cultivated over years of service. People in military intelligence, in the Senate, in the shadowy world of espionage. He asked questions that made some uncomfortable, and others afraid. And piece by piece, a picture began to emerge. The false intelligence that had provoked Grievous originated from a source within the Republic government. The communication patterns suggested someone high up, someone with access to secure channels. Financial records showed unusual payments to intermediaries known to have separatist connections. And most damning of all, several witnesses reported seeing a hooded figure meeting with separatist agents in the weeks before the attack. A figure whose description matched no known operative, but whose bearing suggested authority and power. Obi-Wan arrived on Coruscant 3 days after the battle, having heard of the attack through official channels. He found Anakin in the lower levels, emerging from a meeting with an informant who had once worked in the Chancellor's office. "Anakin, what are you doing? What needs to be done?" "Obi-Wan, I've found evidence. Palpatine is behind this. All of it. That's a serious accusation. I know. But look at this." He showed Obi-Wan everything he had gathered. The communications, the financial records, the witness statements. Obi-Wan's expression grew more troubled with each revelation. When Anakin finished, his former master sat in silence for a long moment. "If this is true," Obi-Wan said slowly, "then we are dealing with something far more dangerous than we imagined." "I know. And there's more. I think Palpatine is the Sith Lord we've been searching for." Obi-Wan's eyes widened. "That's impossible. We would have sensed..." "Would we? He's been right under our noses for years. The Council has suspected a Sith Lord was manipulating events from within the Republic. Who better than the Supreme Chancellor?" The silence stretched between them. Then Obi-Wan nodded slowly. "We need to bring this to the Council. They'll want more proof. Then we'll get more proof. But we can't do this alone, Anakin. This is too big, too dangerous." Anakin wanted to argue. He wanted to confront Palpatine directly, to end this once and for all. But he knew Obi-Wan was right. If Palpatine truly was a Sith Lord, he would be more powerful than any enemy they had ever faced. They needed allies. They needed a plan. Master Plo Koon and the other Jedi remaining on Coruscant were informed of the situation. The reaction was mixed. Some found the evidence compelling. Others were skeptical, unable to believe that the Republic's leader could be capable of such treachery. But all agreed that further investigation was warranted. They decided to approach the Council on Chandrila. Master Windu needed to be informed, along with Master Yoda. If the Order was going to move against the Chancellor, it would need to be unified. A fractured response would be worse than no response at all. But Palpatine was not idle during this time. His spies had reported Anakin's investigation, and he knew that his cover was in danger. The attack on Coruscant had not achieved its intended purpose. Instead of reigniting the war, it had hardened the neutral planet's resolve. And now the Jedi were getting too close to the truth. He had two options. He could flee, abandoning his position and starting over elsewhere. But that would mean giving up everything he had built, surrendering the power he had accumulated over decades. Unacceptable. The other option was to accelerate his plans. If he could not turn the galaxy against neutrality, perhaps he could seize power directly. Order 66 existed as a contingency, a secret command implanted in every clone trooper that would compel them to execute their Jedi commanders. Palpatine had intended to use it later, when his position was more secure. But desperate times called for desperate measures. If he activated the Order now, the Jedi would be eliminated in a single stroke. The chaos that followed would give him the opportunity to declare emergency powers, to transform the Republic into the empire he had always envisioned. But there was a complication. Many of the Jedi were now on Coruscant, outside the Republic's jurisdiction. The clones there had been replaced by local security forces loyal to the neutral government. Order 66 would eliminate the Jedi serving with Republic forces, but it would leave a significant portion of the Order intact. and those survivors would know who was responsible. Palpatine considered his options carefully. He would need to deal with the Coruscant Jedi separately. A more personal touch was required. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Anakin had arranged to meet with Master Windu on Chandrila to present his evidence and discuss the Order's response. But before he could leave Coruscant, he received a communication. It was from Palpatine himself, requesting a private meeting. The Chancellor claimed to have information that would change everything, secrets that could only be shared in person. Every instinct told Anakin it was a trap. But he also recognized an opportunity. If he could get Palpatine to reveal himself, to provide the final piece of evidence needed to expose him, the threat could be ended once and for all. He went to the meeting alone. Padme begged him not to, but he insisted. This was something he had to do himself. If Palpatine was indeed a Sith Lord, Anakin was one of the few people with the power to stop him. And more than that, he needed to understand. For years, Palpatine had been his mentor, his confidant, the one person in power who seemed to truly believe in him. Had it all been a lie? Had every kind word and encouraging gesture been nothing more than manipulation? The meeting was held in a private residence that Palpatine maintained on Coruscant, one of many properties the Chancellor had scattered across the galaxy. When Anakin arrived, he found Palpatine waiting for him in a darkened study, his face illuminated by the glow of a single lamp. "Anakin, thank you for coming. I received your message. You said you had information." Palpatine smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "Always so direct. It's one of the things I've always admired about you." He rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Much has changed since we last spoke. The attack, the investigation. I know what you've been doing, Anakin. I know what you suspect. Anakin's hand moved to his lightsaber. "Then you know why I'm here." "I do. And I want to help you." He turned back to face Anakin, and something in his expression shifted. The grandfatherly warmth he had always projected seemed to fade, replaced by something harder and more ancient. "You've been looking for the Sith Lord, haven't you? The one pulling the strings of this war. You've come so close to the truth, closer than anyone has ever come before. Then tell me, who is it?" Palpatine smiled again, and this time there was no pretense of kindness. "The dark side of the Force. Have you ever considered its power? The Jedi teach that it is evil, that it leads only to destruction. But they are wrong. The dark side offers strength, clarity, the ability to protect those you love." Anakin's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I can teach you things the Jedi never could. I can help you save Padme." The mention of Padme hit Anakin like a physical blow. "How do you know about her?" "I know many things, Anakin. I know about your marriage. I know about the child she carries. And I know about your dreams, the visions of her death that torment you every night." Anakin's world seemed to tilt. He had told no one about those dreams. No one. How could Palpatine possibly know? The Sith have powers that allow us to perceive what others cannot. "Yes, Anakin. I am what you suspected. I am the Sith Lord. But that does not make me your enemy. On the contrary, I am the only one who can give you what you truly want. What I want is to see you brought to justice for what you've done. Is that truly what you want? Or is that what the Jedi have taught you to want? Think, Anakin. The Jedi would have you suppress your emotions, deny your attachments, pretend that you don't feel what you feel. But I have seen your heart. You are not meant for their cold philosophy. You are meant for something greater. He extended his hand. Join me, and I will teach you to save Padme. Reject me, and she will die. The choice is yours. Anakin stood frozen, his mind racing. The temptation was real. If Palpatine truly had the power to save Padme, how could he refuse? But he also remembered everything he had learned, everything he had seen. Palpatine was responsible for countless deaths. He had orchestrated a war that killed millions. He had manipulated Anakin from the beginning, grooming him for this very moment. No. The word came out stronger than Anakin expected. I've spent my whole life looking for someone to tell me what to do. The Jedi, the Council, you. But I'm done with that now. I don't know if I can save Padme, but I know that your way isn't the answer. All you bring is death and suffering. Palpatine's face twisted with rage. Then you will die. Lightning erupted from his fingertips, a torrent of dark side energy that filled the room with blinding light. Anakin barely got his lightsaber up in time, the blade absorbing the attack, but sending him skidding backward. The sheer power behind the assault was staggering, greater than anything he had ever experienced. Palpatine advanced, his hands still crackling with electricity. You could have been my greatest apprentice. You could have had everything. Instead, you will be just another dead Jedi. Anakin gritted his teeth and pushed back. The lightning split around his blade, scorching the walls on either side of him. He took a step forward, then another, forcing himself against the onslaught through sheer determination. I'm not just another Jedi. He channeled the Force, drawing on his anger, his fear, his love for Padme and the child she carried. But instead of letting those emotions consume him, he directed them, focused them into a single point of burning intensity. And then he pushed. The wave of Force energy that erupted from him caught Palpatine off guard. The Sith Lord was thrown backward, crashing through a wall and into the next room. Anakin followed, his lightsaber raised. What followed was a battle that would become legend. They fought through the residence, their powers devastating everything around them. Furniture was reduced to splinters. Walls collapsed. The very building shook with the force of their confrontation. Palpatine's lightsaber emerged, its red blade meeting Anakin's blue in a clash that sent sparks flying. The Sith Lord's technique was ancient and refined, honed over decades of secret practice. He attacked with a precision that left no openings, his blade seeming to be everywhere at once. But Anakin matched him, move for move, his own skills pushed to their absolute limit. They crashed through a window and onto a balcony overlooking the city. Below, emergency vehicles still moved through the streets, responding to the aftermath of the earlier attack. None of them knew that above their heads, the fate of the galaxy was being decided. Palpatine's attacks grew more desperate. You think you can defeat me? I am the culmination of 1,000 years of Sith planning. I am the future. The future isn't written yet. Anakin feinted high, then dropped low, his blade sweeping toward Palpatine's legs. The Sith Lord leapt over the attack, twisting in midair to bring his own weapon down in a crushing blow. Anakin rolled aside, and the red blade carved a deep furrow in the balcony floor. They circled each other, both breathing hard. Anakin could feel his strength flagging, but he could see that Palpatine was tiring as well. The Sith Lord's usual composure was gone, replaced by a snarling fury that left his features almost unrecognizable. You should have joined me, Palpatine spat. Together, we could have brought order to the galaxy. Now there will only be chaos. Order built on lies and death isn't worth having. Then die with your principles. Palpatine unleashed another burst of lightning, but Anakin was ready. He caught the attack on his blade and redirected it, sending a portion of the energy back toward its source. Palpatine staggered, momentarily stunned, and Anakin struck. His lightsaber carved through the Sith Lord's defenses, slicing deep into his shoulder. Palpatine screamed, more from rage than pain, and swung wildly. Anakin ducked the blow and drove his blade forward, piercing Palpatine's chest. The Sith Lord's eyes went wide. He looked down at the lightsaber embedded in his body, then back up at Anakin. His mouth opened, but no words came out. And then the light faded from his eyes, and he collapsed. Anakin stood over the body, his chest heaving. He had done it. The Sith Lord was dead. But there was no sense of triumph, no feeling of victory. Only exhaustion, and a bone-deep weariness that seemed to seep into his very soul. He deactivated his lightsaber and turned away. The death of Palpatine sent shockwaves across the galaxy. When the truth emerged, when evidence of his manipulation was brought to light, the reaction was one of horror and disbelief. The war that had cost so many lives had been orchestrated by a single man, a Sith Lord who had hidden in plain sight for decades. On Chandrila, the Senate convened an emergency session. Vice Chancellor Mas Amedda, who had been implicated in some of Palpatine's schemes, was arrested. New leadership was selected, people who had opposed the Chancellor's accumulation of power and who were committed to restoring the Republic's democratic traditions. The peace talks that Palpatine had tried to destroy resumed with renewed urgency. Both the Republic and the Separatists were exhausted by the war, and the revelation of Sith manipulation gave them a common enemy to unite against. Negotiations that had once seemed impossible now moved forward with surprising speed. General Grievous was dead. Count Dooku had been killed months earlier. The Separatist leadership that remained was largely composed of pragmatists who had never wanted war in the first place. They agreed to a ceasefire, then to a formal armistice, and finally to a comprehensive peace treaty that addressed many of the grievances that had sparked the conflict. Coruscant remained neutral, its status enshrined in the peace accords. Vara Soleni became the first leader of the independent world, guiding it through the transition from wartime chaos to peacetime prosperity. The planet that had once been the center of galactic power now served a different purpose, as a meeting place for diplomats, a refuge for those displaced by the war, and a symbol of what could be achieved when people chose peace over conflict. The Jedi Order underwent its own transformation. The war had exposed deep flaws in its philosophy and structure, issues that had been ignored for too long. The surviving masters gathered to discuss what the Order should become in this new era. Master Yoda, who had felt the Sith Lord's fall through the Force, traveled to Coruscant to participate in these discussions. When he arrived, he sought out Anakin in the temple gardens. "Much to discuss, we have," the ancient master said. Anakin nodded. "I suppose you want to know what happened?" "No, already I do. What I wish to understand is how you resisted. Powerful the dark side's temptation is. Fallen many have, when offered what they desire most." Anakin considered the question for a long moment. He thought about Padme, about the dreams that had tormented him, about the fear that had nearly driven him to desperation. "I realized something," he said finally. "The dark side promises to give you what you want, but it only takes. It would have taken my soul, my family, everything I care about. The only way to truly protect what I love is to stay true to who I am." Yoda's eyes crinkled with what might have been approval. "Wise you have become. More than I expected. I've had good teachers. Well, mostly good. Some of them were ancient green creatures who talked in riddles." Yoda chuckled, a rare sound. Jokes now he makes. Changed indeed you have. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. Then Yoda spoke again. Decisions the Council must make about the Order's future. Your voice we wish to hear. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. I've never exactly been a model Jedi. That is why your perspective matters. Too set in our ways, we have been. New thinking, we need. Anakin agreed to participate in the discussions. Over the following weeks, he worked with Masters Yoda, Windu, and others to reimagine what the Jedi Order could be. Some traditions were preserved, recognized as valuable and timeless. Others were reconsidered, adapted for a galaxy that had changed dramatically. The ban on attachment was modified. Jedi were still expected to avoid letting their personal relationships cloud their judgment, but they were no longer required to suppress their emotions entirely. Love, the new doctrine held, could be a source of strength rather than weakness, if it was embraced with wisdom and care. Anakin's marriage to Padme was officially recognized. There were some who objected, but their voices were drowned out by those who had seen what Anakin had accomplished and understood that his connection to Padme had helped him resist the dark side rather than fall to it. When their children were born, twins named Luke and Leia, it was celebrated throughout the Order. Yoda himself presided over the naming ceremony, his words carrying weight that silenced even the most skeptical critics. A new hope these children represent, not just for their parents, but for the Order and for the galaxy. May the Force be with them, always. The years that followed were not without challenges. The galaxy was scarred by war, and healing took time. There were tensions between former enemies, disputes over territory and resources, and occasional flare-ups of violence. But the peace held, maintained by leaders who remembered the cost of conflict and were determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Coruscant thrived in its new role. The neutral world became a center of culture and commerce, welcoming visitors from across the galaxy. The old Senate building was converted into a museum, a reminder of what had been and what had been lost. New structures rose alongside the old, symbols of a civilization rebuilding itself. Artists and musicians from every corner of the galaxy flocked to Coruscant, drawn by its newfound freedom from political conflict. The arts flourished as they never had during the war years, when resources and attention had been focused on military matters. Galleries opened in buildings that had once housed government offices. Concert halls filled with music from 100 different traditions. The cultural renaissance was a sign of hope, proof that the galaxy could create as well as destroy. The economy adapted to the new reality. Without the military contracts that had dominated for so long, Coruscant's business community had to find new sources of revenue. Tourism became a major industry, with beings traveling from across the galaxy to see the legendary city planet and its famous landmarks. The neutral status actually proved to be an advantage, as visitors could come without worrying about the political implications of their presence. The lower levels, long neglected by the previous government, finally received attention. Infrastructure projects brought clean water and reliable power to neighborhoods that had gone without for generations. Medical clinics were established in areas that had never seen proper health care. Schools opened in buildings that had been abandoned. It was not a transformation that happened overnight, but it was real and it was lasting. Padme retired from politics to focus on raising her children, though she remained a respected voice on issues of peace and justice. She found the transition difficult at first, having defined herself through her work for so long. But watching Luke and Leia grow, seeing the world through their eyes, reminded her of what truly mattered. She wrote extensively during these years, producing memoirs and policy papers that became required reading for a new generation of leaders. Her analysis of what had gone wrong with the Republic, how Palpatine had exploited its weaknesses, became the foundation for reforms across the galaxy. She did not seek credit for this influence, preferring to work behind the scenes, but her impact was undeniable. She and Anakin built a life together, something that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but their bond only grew stronger with time. The secrets and compromises of their earlier relationship were replaced by honesty and trust. They could finally be who they were, together, without fear. Their apartment in the upper levels of Coruscant became a gathering place for friends and family. Obi-Wan visited regularly, his dry wit a constant presence at their dinner table. Ahsoka stopped by whenever she was on the planet, bringing stories of her adventures in the Outer Rim. Bail Organa and his wife came, as did Mon Mothma and other leaders who valued Padmé's counsel. The children grew up surrounded by beings of consequence, learning from them without being overwhelmed by them. Anakin continued to serve as a Jedi, but his role evolved. He spent less time in combat and more time teaching, passing on what he had learned to a new generation of students. He proved to be a surprisingly good instructor, demanding but fair, pushing his pupils to reach their potential while encouraging them to find their own paths. His classes became some of the most popular in the temple. Students who had once feared the legendary warrior discovered a teacher who understood their struggles, who had faced the same temptations and doubts, who had nearly fallen and found his way back. He did not pretend to have all the answers. He simply shared what he had learned, often through stories that left his students thinking for days afterward. One of his favorite lessons involved taking students to the lower levels of Coruscant, to the neighborhoods where he had spent his first bewildering days after arriving from Tatooine. He would show them the poverty that still existed even in the heart of galactic civilization. The people who lived and died, far from the gleaming towers above. The Force flows through all of us, he would say. Not just the powerful or the wealthy. Every being you see here is connected to the same energy that connects you. If you forget that, you've already lost your way. His students would return from these trips changed. Some of them would volunteer in the lower-level clinics and shelters, putting their Jedi training to practical use. Others would simply carry the memory with them, a reminder that their duty was to all people, not just those who could afford to ask for help. Padmé often joined him on these excursions, her presence adding another dimension to the lessons. She spoke of her own experiences as a young queen, the responsibilities of leadership, the weight of making decisions that affected millions of lives. The students listened with rapt attention, seeing in her not just Anakin's wife, but a figure of historical significance in her own right. Their partnership was the talk of the temple. Two people so different in temperament and background, yet so clearly devoted to each other. The younger Jedi would sometimes ask Anakin how he made it work, how he balanced his duties to the Order with his commitment to his family. His answers varied, but the core message was always the same. Love is not a distraction from your purpose. It is your purpose. Everything else follows from that. He never forgot the dreams that had haunted him, the visions of Padmé dying. He came to understand that those dreams had been manipulated by Palpatine, part of the Sith Lord's plan to push him toward the dark side. But they had also taught him something valuable about the nature of fear and how to overcome it. Fear is natural, he told his students. It's what you do with it that matters. You can let it control you, or you can face it and move through it. The Force will guide you if you let it. Obi-Wan visited often, his friendship with Anakin having survived the trials they had endured. They would sit together in the temple gardens, reminiscing about old times and debating philosophy. Their arguments were legendary among the younger Jedi, who would gather to listen whenever the two masters started going at it. One evening, as the sun set over Coruscant's skyline, Obi-Wan raised a question that had been on his mind. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently? If you had accepted Palpatine's offer? Anakin considered the question seriously. Every day. But I try not to dwell on it. What matters is the choice I made and what I do with the life I've been given. Very wise. You really have grown up. Don't sound so surprised. Obi-Wan smiled. I'm not surprised. I always knew you had it in you. I just wasn't sure if you knew it yourself. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights come on one by one. It was peaceful, this moment, and both men savored it. So what's next? Obi-Wan asked eventually. Anakin shrugged. Tomorrow, I'm taking a group of younglings on their first lightsaber practice. Leia wants to watch, though she's still a bit young for a weapon. And Luke? Luke is more interested in starships than lightsabers. He takes after his grandfather that way, I suppose. Your mother's father, you mean? Anakin nodded, though I try not to think about it too much. The past is the past, a wise perspective. You keep saying that. Are you trying to convince me or yourself? Obi-Wan laughed. Both, probably. The conversation drifted to other topics, then eventually faded into comfortable silence. The stars emerged overhead, and the two friends watched them together. Two Jedi who had seen the galaxy's darkest hour and helped bring it back to the light. In the end, the story of Coruscant's neutrality was a story of choices. The choice of a people to demand peace. The choice of a Jedi to resist temptation. The choice of enemies to become partners. None of it was inevitable. None of it was guaranteed. Every step along the way, things could have gone differently. But they didn't, and that made all the difference. The children of Coruscant grew up in a galaxy that knew peace. They learned about the Clone Wars in their history classes, studying the battles and the leaders and the decisions that had shaped their world. They visited the museum in the old Senate building, looking at the artifacts and trying to imagine what it had been like. And sometimes they would see an older man walking through the temple gardens, his robes slightly worn, his hair graying at the temples. He would pause to watch them play, a slight smile on his face, and they would wonder who he was. The older students knew. That's Master Skywalker, they would whisper. He's the one who killed the Sith Lord. He's the one who saved us all. But Anakin never thought of himself that way. He had made a choice when it mattered, nothing more. He had done what anyone would do, given the same circumstances. He had fought for the people he loved and the galaxy he believed in. Years passed, and the galaxy continued to heal. The scars of the Clone Wars faded slowly, replaced by new growth and new possibilities. Trade routes that had been disrupted by the conflict reopened. Worlds that had been devastated by battle began to rebuild. Refugees who had fled their homes returned to find communities waiting to welcome them back. The neutral status of Coruscant proved to be one of the most significant developments in galactic history. What had begun as a desperate attempt by a frightened population to escape the horrors of war became a model for a new kind of governance. Other worlds, seeing what Coruscant had achieved, began to question their own relationships with the Republic and the former separatist territories. Some chose to maintain their traditional allegiances. Others experimented with various forms of independence and neutrality. The result was a galaxy that was more complex, but also more resilient. Power was no longer concentrated in a single capital or a single government. Instead, It was distributed across a network of autonomous worlds and regional alliances. This made coordination more difficult, but it also made tyranny nearly impossible. No single leader could ever again accumulate the kind of power that Palpatine had wielded. The Jedi Order adapted to this new reality. No longer bound to a single political entity, they were free to operate across the galaxy without the constraints that had limited them during the Republic era. They established smaller temples on multiple worlds, creating a presence that was both more widespread and less concentrated. This made them harder to target and easier to access for those who needed their help. Master Windu, who had initially opposed the changes, eventually came to see their wisdom. The Order is stronger now, he admitted to Yoda during one of their many discussions. We are no longer dependent on the Republic for our legitimacy or our resources. We answer only to the Force. Yoda nodded, his ancient face creased with something like satisfaction. Learned much, we have, from our mistakes, from our near destruction. Better, the Order is. Humbler, more aware of our limitations. They were sitting in the garden of the temple on Coruscant, watching the sun set over the city. It was a ritual they had developed over the years, a moment of peace in lives that were often filled with responsibility and challenge. And Skywalker? Windu asked. Do you still believe he was the chosen one? Yoda was silent for a long moment. Brought balance to the Force, he did. Destroyed the Sith, helped remake the Order. If that is not fulfilling the prophecy, know not what is. But he didn't do it the way we expected. Rarely prophecies work as expected they do. The will of the Force, mysterious it is. Trust it, we must. Even when understand it, we do not. Windu nodded slowly. He had spent years grappling with the question of Anakin Skywalker. The young man had defied every expectation, had broken nearly every rule the Order held dear. And yet, he had ultimately done more to save the Jedi than anyone in living memory. It was a paradox that Windu had never fully resolved, and perhaps never would. In the residential section of the city, far from the temple and its politics, Anakin and Padme were enjoying a quiet evening at home. The twins were asleep in their room, exhausted from a day of play and learning. The apartment was filled with the comfortable silence of a family at peace. Do you ever miss it? Padme asked, curling up next to Anakin on the couch. The Senate, the debates, all of it. Anakin considered the question carefully. Sometimes, there was a purpose to it, a feeling that what we were doing mattered. But this matters too. Being here with you and the children, teaching the next generation. It's different, but it's not less. Padme smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. I never thought we'd have this. A real life together. A home. Children. It seemed impossible for so long. I know. I used to dream about it, back during the war. When things were at their worst, I would imagine what it would be like to just be normal. To wake up next to you every morning, to watch our children grow up. It was the only thing that kept me going some days. And now I'm living the dream. It's not always easy. The children are a handful, especially Leia. She's got your stubbornness and my temper, which is a dangerous combination. Padme laughed. She's going to change the galaxy someday. I don't doubt it. Luke will probably help, in his own quiet way. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights through the window. It was a moment of pure contentment, the kind that neither of them had thought possible during the dark days of the war. Across the city, in a cantina in the lower levels, a different kind of gathering was taking place. Ahsoka Tano, who had left the Jedi Order before the end of the war, was meeting with a group of former soldiers and wanderers who had become her informal network of allies and friends. She had spent the years since the war traveling the galaxy, helping those who fell through the cracks of the New Order. She was not technically a Jedi, but she used her training and her connection to the Force to make a difference wherever she could. It was a lonely life at times, but it suited her better than the structure of the temple ever had. Rex was there, the clone trooper who had become one of her closest companions. He had removed his inhibitor chip long before Order 66 could ever be activated, thanks to a discovery made by a fellow clone named Fives. When Palpatine fell and the truth about the chips became public knowledge, Rex had dedicated himself to helping other clones deal with the trauma of learning that they had been designed to betray the people they had fought alongside. "Heard you were on Mandalore last month," Rex said, sliding a drink across the table to Ahsoka. "How'd that go?" "Complicated?" Ahsoka replied, taking a sip. "The clans are still sorting out their differences after the war. Bo-Katan is trying to unite them, but it's slow going. She asked for my help with some negotiations. And you said yes?" I said maybe. "I'm not sure I want to get involved in Mandalorian politics. It tends to end badly for outsiders." Rex chuckled. "Since when has that ever stopped you?" Ahsoka smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I've learned to pick my battles. Some fights aren't mine to fight." They talked for hours, sharing stories and catching up on each other's lives. It was a reminder that even in a galaxy at peace, there was always work to be done. The end of the war had not meant the end of injustice or suffering. It had simply created new opportunities to address them. When Ahsoka finally left the cantina, she walked through the streets of the lower levels with a sense of purpose. The night air was cool, and the sounds of the city surrounded her. Somewhere above, the gleaming towers of the upper levels caught the light of Coruscant's many moons. It was a city of contrasts, of wealth and poverty, of hope and despair. And it was a city that had chosen to step back from war, to seek a different path. She wondered sometimes if she should return to the Order. Anakin had invited her more than once. The new Jedi were different, he had said. More flexible, more understanding. They had learned from their mistakes, and they were trying to build something better. But Ahsoka had found her own way. She was not a Jedi, not anymore. She was something else, something that did not have a name yet. And that was okay. The galaxy was big enough for all kinds of people, all kinds of paths. That was what the war had taught her in the end. There was no single right way to be. There was only the choice to do good, in whatever way made sense for who you were. The Senate building on Chandrila had become the new center of galactic governance, though it operated very differently from its predecessor on Coruscant. The reforms that had followed Palpatine's fall had decentralized power significantly, giving individual systems more autonomy and reducing the authority of the central government. The architecture itself reflected the new philosophy, where the Senate building on Coruscant had been designed to impress and intimidate. The chamber on Chandrila was open and accessible. Citizens could attend sessions from observation galleries. Debates were broadcast live across the holonet. The days of backroom deals and secret votes were over, replaced by a commitment to transparency that would have been unthinkable in the Old Republic. Mon Mothma, who had been one of Palpatine's most vocal critics, now served as Chancellor. She had accepted the position reluctantly, knowing the challenges that awaited her. But she had also seen the alternative, a galaxy that had nearly been destroyed by the ambitions of a single man. If she could help prevent that from ever happening again, she was willing to make the sacrifice. Her inaugural address set the tone for her administration. "We have learned a painful lesson," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber and across the galaxy. "We trusted too much. We questioned too little. We allowed our fear to be used against us. From this day forward, we choose a different path. Not the path of blind faith, but the path of vigilant hope." The speech was met with thunderous applause, though Mon Mothma knew that applause was easy. The real work would be harder. Rebuilding trust took time. Healing wounds took patience. Creating systems that could resist corruption took constant vigilance. Her administration focused on rebuilding trust, both between the government and the people, and between former enemies. The separatist worlds were integrated back into the galactic community through a process of reconciliation that acknowledged the legitimate grievances that had sparked the conflict in the first place. Corporate exploitation was curtailed. Political representation was expanded. Slowly, the wounds of the war began to heal. Special tribunals were established to investigate war crimes on both sides. The process was painful, forcing beings to confront atrocities they would have preferred to forget. But Mon Mothma insisted that justice was necessary for true reconciliation. The guilty were punished, the innocent were cleared, and the galaxy began to reckon with what it had done and what had been done in its name. Economic reforms followed. The massive military-industrial complex that had fueled the war was gradually converted to peaceful purposes. Factories that had built weapons now built medical equipment and agricultural machinery. Shipyards that had produced warships now produced transports and cargo vessels. The transition was difficult, with many workers facing unemployment before being retrained for new industries. But the alternative was worse. It was not a perfect system. No system was. There were still disputes, still conflicts, still moments when it seemed like everything might fall apart. But there was also progress. There was also hope. And there was the memory of what they had nearly lost. A memory that served as a constant reminder of why the work mattered. In the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a new class of younglings was beginning their training. They were the first generation to grow up in a galaxy at peace, the first to learn the ways of the Force without the shadow of war hanging over them. Their teachers were veterans of the conflict, Jedi who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer and had come through it with their principles intact. Anakin taught lightsaber combat, a subject he had once struggled with himself. He had developed his own style over the years, a blend of aggression and control that reflected his unique relationship with the Force. His students learned not just techniques, but philosophy. The idea that a weapon was a tool and that how you used it mattered as much as whether you could. Ahsoka would visit sometimes, helping with particular lessons or sharing stories of her adventures in the Outer Rim. The younglings loved her. This mysterious figure who was almost, but not quite a Jedi, who had walked away from the Order and found her own path. She represented something they could aspire to, the idea that there was more than one way to serve the Force. Obi-Wan focused on diplomacy and negotiation, skills that had served him well during the war, and that would be even more important in the peace that followed. He taught his students that violence was always a last resort. The true strength lay in finding solutions that did not require the ignition of a lightsaber. And Yoda, ancient beyond measure, taught the deepest mysteries of the Force. He had seen empires rise and fall, had watched civilizations crumble and rebuild themselves. His perspective was cosmic, his wisdom hard-earned. The younglings sat at his feet, struggling to understand lessons that would take them lifetimes to fully grasp. Together, they were building something new. Not just an order, but a legacy. A way of being in the galaxy that honored the past while looking toward the future. It It would not be perfect. Nothing was. But it would be theirs. A creation of their own hands and hearts and hopes. The twins grew quickly, as children do. Luke showed an early affinity for mechanics and piloting, taking after his grandmother's father in ways that made Anakin both proud and a little uneasy. He would spend hours tinkering with droids and starship components, building things that worked better than they had any right to. Leia was different. She was sharp-tongued and quick-witted, with a passion for justice that sometimes got her into trouble. She had her mother's political instincts and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her formidable even at a young age. The other children in the temple learned quickly not to cross her. Both twins were strong in the Force, though they expressed it in different ways. Luke's connection was subtle, almost instinctive. He would know things without knowing how he knew them, would feel the rightness or wrongness of a situation before his conscious mind had time to process it. Leia's connection was more direct, more passionate. She could move objects with her mind, could sense the emotions of those around her, could sometimes even glimpse the future. Anakin trained them both, though he was careful not to push too hard. He remembered his own training, the pressure and the expectations, the feeling that he had to prove himself worthy of the title of Chosen One. He wanted something different for his children. He wanted them to discover their own paths, to make their own choices, to become whoever they were meant to be, without the weight of destiny pressing down on them. Padme supported him in this, as she supported him in everything. She had her own relationship with the twins, one that was separate from the world of the Jedi and the Force. She taught them about democracy and governance, about the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. She took them to the museum in the old Senate building, showing them the history of the Republic and the lessons it had to offer. The family gathered every evening for dinner, a tradition that Padme insisted on maintaining no matter how busy their schedules became. They would talk about their days, share stories, argue about trivial things, and laugh at jokes that only made sense to them. It was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, this life they had built together. And sometimes, when the children were asleep and the apartment was quiet, Anakin would stand at the window and look out at the city. He would think about everything that had happened, everything that had led him to this moment. The choices he had made, the temptations he had resisted, the people he had lost and the people he had saved. He would think about Palpatine, about that final confrontation, about the moment when he had looked into the face of absolute power and said no. It had not been easy. Even now, years later, he could remember the pull of the dark side, the promise of everything he had ever wanted. But he had turned away. He had chosen a different path. And now, looking at the galaxy he had helped to save, looking at the family he had helped to create, he knew that he had made the right choice. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been true. True to who he was, true to what he believed, true to the people he loved. The Force flowed through him, as it always had. But it was no longer a burden or a curse. It was simply a part of him, as natural as breathing, as essential as his heartbeat. He had learned to live with it, to embrace it, to let it guide him without controlling him. And in doing so, he had found something he had never expected. Peace. Not the peace of the grave or the peace of surrender, but the peace that came from knowing who you were and being true to that knowledge, the peace that came from loving and being loved, the peace that came from doing your best, failing sometimes, and getting up to try again. It was not perfect. Nothing was. But it was enough. And in a galaxy that had known so much suffering, so much loss, so much darkness, enough was more than anyone had dared to hope for. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.